booktube. I'm sharing another weekly wrap-up, and this one is horribly late, and I'm so sorry, but I just did not get my act together to film this earlier, so yeah, let's just not talk about that and instead talk about the 13 books I read during the week. And I'm so sorry this video is so long. If you're able to watch it until the end, please leave a comment and let me know, because I will love you forever. Let's just get into it. The first book I read was The Wall of Benin and Me. This is a slow-burning romance about a woman who is the personal assistant of a top football player who is really just a huge asshole and is not capable to show any thankfulness at all. And one day she has enough and quits and just wants to leave him and that kind of life behind. But of course, since it's a romance, the football player needs her for something, and the romance story part of that involved from there. This was a great story. It's wonderful, slow build, great writing, nice characters. I really liked the assistant Vanessa and how she handled the situations, and I loved how the characters changed and grew throughout the story, but not in an unrealistic way, but in a way people do change and evolve during time and during a relationship. And if you love slow burning romance with nice writing and actual plot, I really recommend this book. And then I read a review book, the first of many during the week, and that was All Is Not Forgotten by Wendy Walker. And this is a book about Jenny who gets brutally raped. And while the story starts out with that, it is more about how people deal with when something horrendous like that happens, both to the person that it happens to and those around and related to her. And it is also about a controversial drug that medically erases the memory of the rape so that the victim doesn't have to constantly relive those horrible moments, but completely forgets what happened. But while the drug does block out what happened, Jenny is still struggling emotionally and physically to move on and move forward, and all the time trying to figure out what happened since she forgot what happened. This book really packs a huge hard punch. Not only because it is really very honest about a very brutal and even very descriptive rape, but also because the writing really takes you into the story and what happened. Because it is such a hard topic, that book really gets to you. So if you're somebody that has a hard time with hard topics, I would say stay clear of this book. But if you're able to handle this and handle a hard topic and handle a rape case that really is very descriptive, then read this book, because it is a must read, and it is a very brutally honest book, and the author really just does a fantastic job. She showcases not only Jenny's side, but focuses also on her parents. I think it's horrible for parents to have something like that happen to a child and what they struggle with, and trying to find a way to deal with what happened to their beloved child and how they can help her and move on with their lives and her life. And it was a fantastically written story. It was a really important story. It is really brutally honest. It is really brutally honest, but it is one of those books where you really see the impact of what a brutal rape brings, not only to the person that has been raped, but also to the people around her. It doesn't only change one life, it changes a whole huge amount of lives when something like that happens, and this book really showcases that, and it is a wonderfully fantastic job with it. And it is a hard topic, but it handles it very real and honest and just in a very good way. So if you can handle hard topics, I really recommend this book. And then I read another review book because I wanted something lighter and easier to read, so I picked up and read The Girls by Emma Cline, as I said, another review book. This book is about a woman who tells her life in a way where the story goes back and forth between her as an adult and now, and her in her late teenage years when she was part of a cult in the summer of 1969. This book sadly was just okay for me. It has magnificent writing that really made the book very readable for me, but overall the story of the book, the plot, the characters, what happened and how it happened, and the way it was told, it was boring for me. And then I'm so sad to say that, because I really had high hopes for this, but the main character just really got on my nerves, and I can't really love a book if that happens, especially since it was not one of those books where the author wanted people to hate the characters, so that just sadly didn't really work for me. And then I picked up Visions of Heat by Nalina Singh. This is the second book in the the Psych Changeling series. This is a paranormal fantasy romance series. So there are people who are able to predict future and read each other's minds or emotions or stuff like that, which are the psychs, clearly. And then there are the changelings who are able to switch into animal forms. And this entire series is about one psych and one changeling meeting and falling in love and everything in between that. And I don't really want to say anything more and go into details of what this specific book is about, because I really do think that it is best to go basically blind into the series, because that is how I did it and I loved it because of that. So the second book was great, not as fantastic as the first one in my option, but only because I really loved the main characters in the first book, and even though they had a side role in the second book as well, I didn't love the main characters of the second book, so that just kind of put the book down a slight bit for me. This was still great, and I love that the series is not completely focused on the sexual relationship between two people, but actually about world building and relationship building and connections and figuring out how two different lives that are basically completely separate from another can work together. And it is not completely insta love as well, so it's all the things I love in paranormal romance put together, and it's just a fantastic series and really recommend it if you haven't read it yet. And after that I picked up another review book, and that was Because You'll Never Meet Me by Leah Thomas. And this book is about two boys, Ollie and Moritz, who are both not normal in the sense that Ollie has a dangerous allergy to anything electric and Moritz has a pacemaker, which of course makes it impossible for the two of them to meet. This book is written in the letters that the two boys write to each other, where they share their lives and stories and going on, and sometimes compare their very different lives, since they not only have very different illnesses but also live in completely different countries, since Ollie lives in the US and Moritz lives in Germany. I did enjoy this book. The writing was nice. I really loved that there was a clear difference between the two characters. There was never any confusion about who was currently writing the letter. You always know if it was Ollie or if it is Moritz who's writing and telling the story, so that was fantastic. I also really like that it was told from the perspective of two boys. And I also love that this features two very different illnesses and talks about the problems both of those kinds of things bring while growing up and trying to fit in. And what I didn't love about this book was, or basically I hated the ending. I also didn't like that the German parts weren't very realistic, at least as far as I as a German born and raised person can say, and I am a bit nitpicky about that, so I'm confessing that. But if you want to write a book about Germany, make it realistic, and it's not that hard. You can find school information and living information and all that online without any problems. And this book had an overall European feel, but and just threw in some German words, and that was it. That was the German aspect, and that kind of bothered me as well. This book was good but not great. It could have been better if the author would have done slight changes in my option. And then I read yet another review book, and that was A Dictionary of Mutual Understanding by J.K. Kaplan. This is a book that was longlisted for the Bailey Women's Prize for Fiction this year, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to read it. The other one is that it is a historical fiction about a woman who lost her daughter and grandson in the atomic bomb attack in Nagasaki, I think it's how you say it, in 1945. And this gives snippets of her life before the disaster and after, and how she tries to deal and at the same time not forget, until one day a man comes to her door and claiming that he is the grandson she thought she lost. I really enjoyed this book. It was a very heartfelt story, and it really showcases the Japanese side of World War II, which I really very far and few between get in books, so that was lovely. And I also loved that this book really showcases the surviving and suffering through those atomic bombs droppings and just figuring out who survived and where you can find information. This book was a very quick read, but it really stays with you after you read it. It is not one of those books that you read and forget about, but it is one of those beautiful books where, because of the characters and their plots and their story itself, it just stays with you after you finish the book. It's a wonderfully done book, and if it sounds like something you enjoy, I would really recommend it. And then I read the first three books. Was the Rock Kiss series by Nalini Singh. The first one of those is Rock Addiction, which is all about a librarian who really just tries to live a very quiet and ordinary life when she meets Fox, who is the lead singer of a very popular rock band. And of course something comes out of that meeting, because romance serious. So yeah, I personally found this first book very insta-lovey, which I'm not a huge fan of. I also kind of missed the real plot in this first book, because there was a a few background moments where we got plot and actual character development, but overall this book was basically porn. We got lots of sex scenes and lots of those instantly very possessive kinds of guy moments, and I missed a real plot, which makes it sound very harsh and mean, but there was lots of sex and very, very, very insta-lovey things happening in this book, and it was not the greatest, but the writing was nice. It is a nice book if you don't mind that it's a very sex-heavy book. The second book in this series, Rock Hard, is quite different from the first one. We follow the best friend of Charlie, who gets promoted in her job to be the personal assistant of the new CEO of the company she works at, and Charlie is a very shy woman, constantly described as a mouse in the book, and she is rather scared of her new boss, who she nicknamed the T-Rex because he stomps around and growls and leaves large carnages in his wake wherever he goes. But of course sparks fly, and story evolves from there because romance. This book is, as I said, very different to the first one. Actually, it is basically the complete opposite because we have a very slow building romance in the second book. Charlie has a very bad past, and so she is going very slow, and the boss, who's her love interest, is very perceptive to that. He's going very slow with her, so that is fantastic. The writing was great, and I love that there was no instant love. There was instant attraction, but not instant love. The love slowly built throughout the story, so I love that as well. And there was real plot. There were different plot lines as well, so the characters each had their own nicely developed history and stories to tell in this book. And yes, there was sex, but the sex in this book was very small and a side thing and not the main entertainment as it was in the first book, so that was fantastic as well. And this was definitely my favorite from the series, and I really recommend the second book. And then I read Rock Redemption, which is the third part, and this is a review book I got. So one of the reasons I read the first two books. This book was once again following a different character, but we got a few glimpses of one that we met in the first book, since this book is following another member of the rock group Fox is part of, and of course a woman, because romance book here, once again. This third book was my least favorite of them all, mostly because I just didn't like the two main characters of this book. I didn't like how the woman let herself be pushed around and just basically mistreated by the guy, and how the guy Noah was a complete ass who kept purposefully doing things that he knew would hurt the girl. And the book was just overall pretty slow, and then all of a sudden all the things happened shortly before the end, and it didn't make sense to me. Overall, this book was not fantastic for me, but the entire series is worth a read, and I really loved the second book. And then I read the last review book for the week, and that was Because I Love You by Tori Rigby. And this story is about a 16-year-old girl, Andy, who loses her virginity to her best friend and ends up pregnant. And it is all about Andy trying to figure out what she's going to do with the baby and her life from that point on. This book really reminded me a lot of the movie Juno. Let's start with the positive things. I really loved Andy in this book. She handled everything very wonderfully. I loved her as a main character because she's strong and able to think for herself and decide for herself and not let herself be pushed into something that she doesn't want simply because others keep telling her to do it. I also love that Annie's mother is a wonderful parental figure. She really is helpful and supportive. The writing was very nicely done as well. I loved how the topic of adoption was handled in this book, with Annie trying to figure out if she wants to do that or if she even is open to adoption. The things in this book that I didn't really love was the overly dramatic part of how people reacted to a pregnant teenage girl. And yes, that is not the best thing to happen, but realistically, how many people care if you're not involved in that? So overall, this was good, but not fantastic, but it had great writing and a wonderful main girl. And then I read The Storied Life of AJ Flynn by Gabriel Zafon, which is a story about a man in his late 30s that loses his wife in a car accident. He owns a bookstore that isn't doing fantastic. He also owns a very rare first edition of a book that gets stolen one night. In the beginning of this book, all of his life is really it's not working for him. It is not fantastic. But then he finds a 2-year-old girl in his shop one night, and because it is in the middle of winter and on a Friday night, he lives on an island. There is no way for child services to come and get the child from him, and so Figuri decides to keep the girl over the weekend, and then the story really starts going from there. And I love this book. This is fantastic. It is definitely one of my favorites. The writing was great. Figuri was an exceptional character, very different and dark but loving. And this book was sad but also happy. It is a great family story, but it is also about finding yourself yourself and doing something for yourself outside of your family, and I love it, and everybody should read it if you haven't yet. Anyway, moving on. The next book I read was Monuments Man by Robert Etzel, and this book is about a group of people that come together to save priceless art pieces that were in danger of being destroyed during the Second World War. Not only because Hitler stole a huge amount of art during that time, but also because during the bombings, buildings with priceless pieces of art were destroyed. So a group of different people come together and try to save and find those pieces of art and return them or bring them somewhere safe until they can be returned. This book wasn't really that great for me. The writing was really boring and very repetitive. You're constantly being retold over and over again what you already knew because it has been already told to you in this book. The author tried to keep very true to the actual story and documents that he had and what people said and did during the specific times, instead of actually building realistic characters in this book, and that didn't work for me. I would have preferred him to try and build a more fictional version of this real historic story. I can't really recommend this book because it felt very dry and boring and very historical facts and no real character or story development at all, and it just was very boring, and it is so sad for me to say it, but yeah, just watch the movie, don't read the book. The last book I finished during the week was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the illustrated edition, as you can see, and I don't need to give a summary of this book or say how much I love it, because it's fantastic, and this edition is so beautiful and makes the story so much better and so much more wonderful. But I have to say that I would have loved to get some scenes that are missing in this book, or the pictures are missing in this book, because I know that Kate would have made such beautiful pictures. For example, I really miss the scenes of Harry's uncle sitting at the breakfast table on Sunday saying that there is no post coming because it's Sunday, and then the letter slams in the back of the head, and I would have loved Kay to make a picture of that, because I know he could have and would have and should have done a fantastic job with that picture, and I would have loved to see that. Would also have loved to see Hermione being introduced, because we get Harry and we get Ron meeting each other, but we don't get Hermione, and I would have loved to get that moment, since Hermione is just as important as a character as Harry and Ron in the book series, so I would have loved to get her as well. I'm not saying I could have done better, because a spider stepping into a paint puddle can draw better than I do, so not saying I could have done better, just saying that some moments that I always picture when I read this book were missing, and that was kind of sad. But this edition is magnificently beautiful, and I really recommend that everybody only read this version of the book from now on, because it brings so much to the story, and it's such a gem and such a beauty, and I love it. Those are all 13 books I read during the week, and I'm so sorry this is so long. I try to make it as short as possible. I would love to hear, as always, what books you read during the week and how you did on the booktubeathon, since that was during the week. And if you read any of the books I just mentioned, please let me know. And if you read the illustrated edition of Harry Potter, please let me know. If you're also one of those people that are missing one of those nice little scenes that you always picture, and which one it was, because I'm always curious about that, because Harry Potter. I would love to hear from you and chat with you in the comments, so please feel free to do that. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in my next one. Bye!